Hi there, welcome to iSpy 360's webinar series. I'm your host, Ish. Just gonna wait a couple minutes. Just want to make sure people are logging in and everything is fine. Yeah, I think we're good to go. Before we begin, if there are any questions, please feel free to write directly into the question and answer section at the bottom of your screen. Or if you experience any technical difficulties, you can message my colleague Frederick, who is ready and waiting in the chat section on the right-hand side. Today's topic is Don't Be Afraid of Technology, and we are lucky to be joined with our fantastic guest, James Dearsley. James is recognized as one of the leading thought leaders on the future of the real estate market. He has been voted the most influential person in Proptech and been shortlisted by the Press Awards as best commentator on the property market. His role as co-founder of Unisu, the global leader of PropTech data, information, and resources, means he has unrivaled perspective on global PropTech trends. He's also fortunate to be a popular keynote speaker and moderator at global property and PropTech conferences. Given James's vast experience of the market, he's often used to give delegates a broad perspective on the history of real estate innovation, with lively audiences, interactions, and debates. However, sometimes he's asked to branch out and explain his futuristic perspectives on how the industry will evolve and advance. All of James' efforts are with the ultimate aim of connecting both traditional real estate players with those looking to innovate, the PropTech entrepreneurs together. James believes everyone can benefit. Welcome, James.
Thanks, Ish. Appreciate it. It's good to be here late on a Friday night.
Yeah, but there's no better way to end a Friday with the very educational webinar.
So, let's hope so.
Firstly, tell us a bit about yourself and how you got started in real estate.
Okay, so I started as a real estate agent, a broker, based in London. I had 5 years of work with an agency called Foxtons, which in the UK most people are familiar with. They're probably the most hated agent in London. Very aggressive, very forward-thinking, and they generally wear a lot of people out because it's pretty hard-paced and full-on. But I had a great time really understanding the residential real estate market. I fell in love with properties, and even to this day, sort of over 20 years on, for me, the property market is still filled with fascination. Every property has a story, and even now when I take a back seat and I only really deal with the actual technology side of it all and trying to help people in that position, it still comes back to a deep-rooted love of the sector. And traveling the world, as I'm very fortunate to do, my first thought is how wonderful the buildings are in the cities, and the residential and the commercial buildings. It's just awesome. Very, very lucky to do that. But I went from residential. I then went into development side, and I worked in the development field for another sort of 7 or 8 years, and then really branched out into the sort of the entrepreneurial mindset and ran a couple of companies, and then ultimately was a consultant to the real estate industry to sort of be there to evangelize and help them steer the way through technology adoption. And I was always a sort of an optimist that technology could be used for good as much as for evil as many people think. Yeah. And it ended up really in setting up Unisu, which was where we are today. So it's been quite a journey, but a good one.
I mean, just to touch on what you said about the cities and going to different areas, I'm a huge fan of different architecture and stuff. So for me, I can understand why people get into real estate, just look at the different properties.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it brings back memories. I was very fortunate to fly to Argentina, and we were doing a consultancy operation with a large global bank who are looking at the digital transformation of their banking arm because of the changes that technology was bringing in the residential real estate space. And I mean, sort of off that from a second, they were looking at the next generation people buying houses and how do they get people buying homes when most of them want to rent homes. And it was a fascinating case study. But, while I was out there seeing the architecture as some of almost the sort of the slums of Buenos Aires next to the rich areas of Buenos Aires, and the stories behind how those people got into those buildings was magnificent. And really what we all have to do, I think, in our industry is, if you're in a city, as an example, and you look out of the building and you look out in front of you and you see every single window of every single building, that's what technology is impacting at the minute. We can lose sight of that, but behind every single window, there is something that can be used from a technological adoption side of things. And, in a city like Buenos Aires, when you're looking at the vista of, sort of slums on one side, quasi-social housing on another, the absolute center of Buenos Aires with its residential and financial districts there, then you're going into the sort of the dock areas, and then you're going, you suddenly realize actually how broad the built environment is, and how technology can have an impact on all of it. It's really fascinating.
Well, since you touched on technology, it leads perfectly into the next question. What was it about real estate technology that drew you in?
What does it draw? I don't really know. I suppose back in the day when I was in the development world, it was just, and one quick story around that. I used to work, and we used to help developers sell developments. It's like Spanish developers and Cypriot developers and Turkish developers and some in America. And one of the biggest challenges back in the early 2000s was actually communicating when a development had been released to a multilingual audience. And the very fact that when I started in that role, it took about a month to go from the development being launched in, let's say, Spain, to actually a massive sort of 2-inch thick letter or parcel being delivered into Sweden to some of my teams, which was basically 2 inches of thick 2D floor plans of a development that was being released in Spain, to try and help the Swedish understand and then buy those properties in Spain as a second home. Right. It was impossible. You couldn't communicate the life, you couldn't communicate the development and why people should be buying it by sending in the post 2 months later a 2-inch thick part of 2D floor plans. And through the use of technology, we got it to the point where actually within 48 hours, oh, by the way, it was all in Spanish, within 48 hours of it launching in Spain, by using technology, we're able to create multilingual PDF documents with graphics that the Swedish company could then give to the Swedish clients to say, there you go. So we'd gone from a 2-month sales cycle to a 2-day sales cycle, not in Spanish, but in Swedish. And we were helping these people by using technology to do it. And that, I suppose, that's really what got me involved in the time at Foxtons, which was this massively driven agency. Again, different example with using CRM systems well and actually helping agents sell properties better. And yes, as with everything, there's an initial period of pain of people not understanding how to use the technology. But if they were able to change their mindsets a little bit to say, well, actually, let me understand how I use a technology. I don't want to expect that it works the way that I work, but if I can understand the way that it works, technology can be a force for good. And I think that's probably what drew me in, which was there are many benefits you can get from working with rather than against tech.
Okay, that's is really fascinating to me, just because like prop tech in general is quite a specific branch on its own. It just, the technology is adapted specifically for real estate, and it just has something different about it. I feel like it is very innovative.
But you say that, but the interesting thing, I would disagree with it in a little bit, because actually I think prop tech is actually very broad, because I think when you look at an actual definition of what prop tech is and what it isn't, you then realize that, as part of prop tech, you've got the construction technology side, you've got the financial technology side, you've got mortgage technology, you've got energy technology, you've got sustainability tech, you've got clean tech, and they're all on the outer fringes of this property market. So actually, prop tech in itself is just a marketing phrase. It's a load of rubbish. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. And it's something that we all invented because we needed to create a community in the social media world. So hashtag PropTech became something. It was at a time when the Americans, they were running RE tech, which I didn't feel, and a few others didn't feel was necessarily representative globally. And so we made a big push that PropTech should be this catch-all phrase that we could include RE tech for real estate technology, CRE tech for commercial real estate technology, and so on and so on and so on and so on. So really, prop tech is just a marketing phrase, but actually underneath it sits any number of different sorts of terminologies and technologies which encompass the built environment, because the built environment is so broad.
Right.
You know, technology can hit it in so many different places. I mean, take urban mobility, for example. You know, urban mobility and trains and planes and cars working within city environments is massively changing the way that the built environment works. And you can see the transitions that our cities have been in over the last couple of centuries, where buildings have been built generally around transport hubs and transport networks. And all of a sudden now, as we evolve the next generation of driverless cars and electric cars and all how that works, that's going to be the next iteration of the way that our cities and towns develop. So again, yeah, Proptech is quite a niche bit, but it's not, because of all the other little elements which fit around it. So yeah, it's fascinating times.
Very fascinating. Where do you see people making the most mistakes with their use of Proptech?
On what side? As in on the property side?
Yeah, on the property side, where do you see the mistakes happen?
They're buying tech for the sake of buying tech.
Right. So it's more for namesake than actual, because they don't understand the utility of it, probably.
Yeah, totally that. I think what you find is that they panic and they think, oh, we must get tech because somebody else has done it. And they don't really think that the foundation question should be, do we need it? And if we do, why? Once you've answered the question of why are we doing something, then you need to do it. If you're suddenly doing it because your competition's doing it, and there was a report out this week, which was a combined report by Concrete, which is a VC fund, and Clifford Chance, the global law firm. And what they had found was that something like, I think it was the third largest resistance to adopting technology solutions in the real estate industry. And I think it was something like 49% of respondents had put this, or 41 or 49, had said that the resistance to doing it is they don't want to be the first to do it.
Right. Okay. So it's more fear than anything else.
Yeah. So in a lot of cases, they'll jump in to do it just because someone else has done it.
Right.
And I just thought that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard, which is they won't do it themselves and think about why they need a technology solution. But as soon as somebody else has done something, it's fine, we'll go and do it. And we need to do it quick because they've done it and they'll get an edge on us. It's not, you know, people, when you talk about digital transformation, actually the technology, which is, by the way, when I said it's not about Proptech, it is digital transformation is what it's really about. Proptech is a marketing phrase. Digital transformation is actually the change. When you think about the strategies of digital transformation and implementing change management within a large firm, it always starts with this mentality shift. And the last thing that changes is actually the technology.
Right.
And when
it's more the people.
When your C-suite are bought into change and they've got the right data that they can make the decisions on, they've actually addressed what the competitors are doing, and the competitors now, and also the competitors in the future, because that is a very different question and answer that you've got to ask. That's when you start saying, right, now let's have a look at the sorts of technologies that we need. And in some cases, when I say, you know, when you're talking about the biggest mistake and when people jump into a solution, it's because they're not really aware of the problems they're trying to solve. And in a lot of cases, they should just be thinking about what do they need to be like in a year, 2 years, 5 years time, and then saying, right, we want a solution that will help us achieve that. And then they go to market and say, that's what we want to do. Don't go assuming that you need an AI solution just because your competitors got one.
Just because your friend has one. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly that.
I mentioned Unisu very briefly, but could you tell us a bit more about Unisu and what the goal is behind Unisu?
Yeah, sure. So when we were consultants, and we were consulting, actually, funnily enough, ironically, we were consulting for almost everybody other than the real estate industry. We were consulting for large global banks. We were doing it for large global insurance companies. And they'd all worked out that the property market was shifting and changing. But the same questions kept on coming up and up and up, which was, which firm should we use for this, or what firm should we use for that? And can we invest in businesses that do this for us? And we realized that there just wasn't really a global resource that was available for the global market. And one of the most important things to realize is that Proptech is really a global solution for a local problem. So you could find a Proptech in Hong Kong that deals with a problem that has got, from, I don't know, New York, as an example.
Yeah.
And so we first and foremost came up with the philosophy that we had to build the single source of truth of solutions for the property industry about technology. And actually the double S in the Unisu stands for single source. And so we set out building a database of over 8,000 different companies. We're now at about 8,500 technology suppliers that service the real estate industry. And they can all come in and they can find all the information, the data and the resource, as you said, about it. But really the mission of Unisu is to connect and educate the buyers and sellers of property technology. And we have a host of different products. One is obviously a data product where you can come in and just search for the data around the property industry. The other side of this is a procurement project. So, even if you use our site and you find 70 different artificial intelligence suppliers, you can actually use this as a free and anonymous procurement solution to do that. And then we've sort of fallen by mistake into the world of events and conferences over the last year or so because of COVID. And we called that there was a need for a change in conferences, and we've come out the other side, suddenly in a sort of an events focus as well.
That's fantastic. That truly is. I think you're hinting at a conference in January, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yeah. It was. Yeah. And we've actually done 2 conferences since then, and we've got a third significant events happening in January. So it's been a pretty busy year this year.
So what is currently the biggest challenge facing Proptech, the Proptech industry as a whole?
The biggest challenge, there's 2 things really, I think, and let's address it headlong, which is the COVID situation. So I think for a lot of smaller businesses that haven't perhaps got proof of concept yet, I think there's definitely a funding winter happening at the moment for the smaller businesses with not proven business models. I think that will be short-lived. There's already proof happening that the venture capital market are turning back to early stage startups again. So what was happening, because Proptech was maturing so much, the stages of investments being made were becoming a lot later. So the median investment each month, each year was growing considerably year on year. But the last 6 months, there's been obviously the deal volume has fallen off a cliff, but the median value is still increasing. But when you look at the attitudes of the VCs around the world, they've now moved from thinking they'll make more later stage investments to now making more early stage pre-seed and seed investments. And I'm seeing that because I think COVID has now disrupted our own fast moving sector, and it's disproved some business models which are now no longer viable, but it's also really proven a few other business models which are definitely becoming more interesting for the early stage investors. So, I'm expecting that to be a short lift. But I suppose the other big challenge for the Proptech businesses is still the education of the real estate market itself. So I think if you have got a proven business model, if you have got a proof of concept that's working and it's providing value, I think still the education of the traditional real estate market is going to be a barrier and going to be a challenge. And there's no doubt that COVID has helped that, because it's almost pressed the reset button. And we used to say that the Americas and Europe were quite a way ahead of the rest of the world, but really having to be forced into a digitized workspace and working from home, and the flexibility now of home and work, I think that's forcing a lot of technological issues on countries like South America or Africa, which have got sizable real estate markets, but now they're being forced into a technology adoption, which they just simply weren't there for, originally. There was
wasn't set up. There was no tech infrastructure ready to just get into it and just adapt straight away.
Definitely. But I do think, if I can say on that front, I think that, beforehand, it was always America and Europe leading the way, and obviously Australia were there and they were fast moving, and it was the developed economies. Yeah. Now we're seeing just as much interest from the developing economies in trying to find different solutions and interest as the developed. And that just shows that it's really pressed the reset button for everybody to start from the same level now and progress. So yeah, it's exciting times.
I think the one thing coronavirus kind of did for everyone globally is it just made everyone take a pause and reassess where they are. Yeah. Even, every industry kind of had to reassess how they're going to function and how they're going to move on.
Totally. Absolutely. And, you know, I mean, you know, obviously you guys have obviously benefited hugely from this. And I don't expect that to end anytime soon. I think the whole virtual play that we're going to be seeing, and again, in that Clifford Chance and Concrete report, it was basically saying that the virtual showing of office and residential space is going to keep on going from a variety of different areas, from obviously a point of sale point to a valuation perspective, from an insurance perspective. You know, the needs and demands of the virtual space were seen by the industry as the most important technologies to come out of this transition to a more digital world. So, you know, you guys are probably having a field day.
Wouldn't go that far, but yeah, it's been
Well,
all right.
it's all hard, right? It's hard work, but you know, you're in a strong technology sector at the minute.
Actually, this is a good question. Where do you see the gaps in the real estate industry that tech can't help? So,
emotions every time. You know, I often get asked, and I've got a feeling it's probably something that we'll touch on at some point, which is, you know, so many people go, you know, is there a future for brokers, and are there a future for, you know, estate agents, to take the UK term, and I always say that you have to question what the role is of these people now. And one of the things that the technology market will never be able to do is to replace the emotion. So, you know, one of the things I used to love as a broker myself was, you know, showing people around a property, and when you show people around a property in the physical space, I would deliberately let them do the walk. I would let them look around, and you would always know if it was right for them within 10 seconds of going in the house.
Right.
And the skill of a good estate agent is applying the pressure when you need it to, or not the pressure, but the confirmation when you need to, and letting them experience it when you don't. And for me, the real role of the human being in that interaction, there's two times when it's important. Number one, it's the reassurance when they need somebody to trust at the point they say, this is it, this is the one, isn't it? And everybody, I don't care who it is, at that point of, oh my God, this is perfect. Do we do it? You know, that point when they look in your eye and you say, yes, I'm really interested. That's when you need the human. The prosaic nature of technology will get in the way at that point, and it will act in a non-emotive sense. When somebody finds, in the case of, let's say, a family home or a downsizing or something, when something's right for them, you need someone to look in the eyes and trust. So that's the first bit. The second bit is in the negotiation side. One of the hardest things generally, and it may be more a British thing than others, is that the point of negotiation with a third party. That the brokering of the deal is still a very emotional part. I mean, less so perhaps in the lettings and the rental space, but definitely in the buying space, when, you know, if you said to a consumer, would you like to negotiate with the buyer directly? Most people still say they don't want to do that, because it's an emotional, stressful situation where, especially if you found something that you really love, you don't want to negotiate that out. It's a very difficult thing innately for human beings to do. And that's why I think technology, again, there may be ways of doing that. I've seen some technologies where, you know, a direct interaction of buying and selling and negotiating takes place in a little sort of black box, and it's, you know, it's done a slightly different way where the buyer and the seller don't actually speak, but it's sort of done through an intermediary technology solution. But even then, you know, the negotiation of the third party is still it's an element of trust that is still needed, and that's why I think that technology will still fall foul of that in my view.
I mean, yeah, there's some things, you know, technology or even a robot can never do. It can't love. It just can't. So,
no, it can't.
Do you think technology could replace the whole buying and sell? Well, we've just covered this pretty much.
No, it will never do it.
So you don't think it would ever replace the whole buying and selling process in the real estate industry?
No, not the entire process. It will. I mean, I think the problem that we've got as an industry is we look at this too binary, which is, will this replace a job? And a very famous report written years ago by McKinsey was urging people to, when you look at the future of jobs, and this wasn't just about real estate, this was about everything, don't look at the future of a job, look at the future of tasks. So there are jobs that an estate agent will do, or well, anyone for that matter, which the large majority of that role can be automated. You know, tasks like the administration, or, you know, when it comes to managing a deal pipeline, there will always be elements of that deal that can be dealt with in a much more streamlined way. And so you've just got to break that job into different tasks and then enable the people that are very good at the emotional side or the managing of the client side. Those sorts of things I don't think necessarily will change. So I don't think you can replace the entire role. It'll just change. The whole role will change. And I think what it will do, if I may say, is it will lessen the number of people that are needed. It just simply won't, it won't replace the entire thing.
It's like what you said earlier about adapting to your tools. So if you know how to use the tools correctly, you're then able to adapt correctly.
Yeah, but I also think that, you know, some of those tools will ultimately be then usurped by other newer tools, and it's the people who are adaptable and willing to try things and willing to take a risk and constantly are able to learn. I mean, quite often you see, you know, as a father, I remember once on a stage I was asked, you know, you're talking about all this change, so, you know, what do you recommend that we do? And I just said, well, quite often you're asked about your children and what are you trying to teach your children? And, you know, I look at it when I talk about schools, and they often talk about, you know, the math scores and the English scores. And I often say, I don't really give two hoots about the maths and the English scores. I want to know that they can communicate with people. And I just say, I want communication and confidence in my children. But the other bit on that is to say, I don't care about the math scores or the English. I want you to teach my kids how to communicate, and I want them to give them confidence. But so that communication bit is critical, because really we have to change to be able to communicate with people still. But we've also got to instill in our children the ability to communicate with machines and robots and computers more, because that is going to be the key. And if we can learn to be adaptable and we can learn to change and always evolve and test ourselves, they will be the people that will evolve and become better in the next generation. The people who just think we'll be okay and put the blinkers on, they're not going to do it because they can't evolve. So yeah, it's a difficult thing to teach, I think.
Definitely. Completely agree with that. You have to like get people to open their eyes.
Yeah.
Literally. So if you ran a brokerage or were an independent realtor, what prop tech would be vital to invest in?
It's really hard because you've got to. There's so many points of the purchase cycle. I would say that there's two sides. For me, there's two elements of it. So obviously, pre-sale, there's two absolutely pivotal technologies, let's say, that you need. The first one is the boring tech. You know, you need to have a really, really good relationship management system. It's not exciting, it's boring.
Yeah.
But by using the right systems which can communicate with people in the right way, and you can store information in the right way, it sets the good foundation for good lead management and good lead skills. So, you know, that's a boring bit of prop tech. And not because I'm on here with you guys, but, you know, the ability to be able to virtually view is an important aspect, and it's going to continue to be. And, you know, I got into the property market because of my love for technologies like augmented reality and virtual reality. And it still stands true today that to be able to virtually view, it takes away the friction between intention and action, and it makes the entire role of the real estate agent, it makes it much more dynamic and much more efficient. Because, you know, if you used to see on average about 15 properties before you bought a property, that was 15 properties that each person had to go and see. The amount of viewings you had to do as a real estate broker to go and take people to those properties was too much. So yeah, you know, I'm not going to say, you know, because I'm here, but genuinely, you need to have some form of virtual viewing ability to do. And then you've got the post-sales transaction. For me, the third sort of technology I would say is certainly around the transparency of the transaction. And so it doesn't matter where you are in the world. One of the most frustrating bits for any customer is the moment an offer is agreed is the paperwork and the admin to get them to then move in. And that doesn't matter if it's in, you know, sort of the land registry systems we have in the UK, or the title insurances we have in the US, or all of the different ways that we transact from all around the world, because everyone's slightly different. But there is a lack of transparency post-deal that everyone struggles with. And there, you know, it takes too long, it's too bureaucratic, and there are reasons for it, but we certainly need to improve that side of things as well. So there's lots of what I would call lead management technologies, which will make the job of the estate agent and the person buying a lot easier.
Okay, great. That's amazing. Are there any areas in the real estate industry that still have not adapted to tech and need to?
Yeah, the post-sales process. So everything I've just been saying, it's insane. Right. You know, and actually the interesting thing here is that it doesn't really matter where you are in the world. You've got a similar problem. It doesn't matter if you're in a developed world country where you have got trusted systems. Mm-hmm. Actually, that causes as many problems as you've got when you've got non-trusted systems. So take, you know, in the UK, you have the land registry, which is the store of information about title. In America, you've got this multi-billion-dollar title industry. Right. We don't want to disrupt it because it's trusted and real. Mm-hmm. The Americans don't want to disrupt it because it's such a massive revenue generator in terms of title insurance. So we've got these bureaucratic forms of trust which work. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but it still causes problems. In the developing world, you've got challenges around title again, which are all to do with the trust in the system. And therefore, really in developing and developed, you're going to have a challenge. But in some cases, actually, we could be usurped with the trust systems in the developing world if they start building on sort of blockchain-based open sort of title registries, which are immutable. And they could well usurp the way and the speed of which we are. And there's a really interesting index released by, I think it's either Knight Frank or Savills every year, which is called the Transparency Index within the real estate market. And the more transparent a market is, the more investment that market receives every year from outside investment coming in. And obviously the developing world is never as transparent as the developed world. Mm-hmm. But in due course, if you've built a transparent title network, you're going to get more transparency in transactions, which I think means from an investment standpoint, people are going to be more and more comfortable with diverting funds from developed nations into developing nations if they've got trust. So there's a really interesting dynamic happening post-transaction, I think, of that.
The moment there's transparency involved, it's just about building that trust. The moment you have trust, the risk isn't there anymore because you have some sort of faith that it might actually pan out.
Correct. Absolutely.
What are the technology trends about the future of Proptech? So like we know about, virtual staging, virtual tours. Where do you see the next stages going?
Depends who you are. Again, if I look at this with an investment hat on and a funding hat on, the trends are always towards more infrastructure-based markets. So Internet of Things, digital twin technology, business, building information modeling, all infrastructure-based work where then technologies and strategies can be built on top of. It's a lot about data, it's a lot about analysis, it's a lot about building the foundations of the next generation. So if you're a VC, you're looking at infrastructure development. If you're looking at it from an industry side, it's more emotional. I think we're certainly seeing a lot more of a push in I'll use words like control, transparency, as I've mentioned, certainty, and affordability. So to give you some examples of what I mean by that, well, transparency I've talked to you about in terms of the chain that people go in when they buy a property and where it falls through. That's going to be around transparency. Certainty, you mentioned earlier on, I think, is about the iBuyer markets. Now, the iBuyer markets are a fascinating one. They've received billions of dollars of funding. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with the dynamic. I don't think the way that an iBuyer works, which is essentially buying at or just below market value and giving people the money in a certain amount of time with a few differences. You know, it gives people the certainty of a purchase, but I don't think the model is sustainable. But it's an emotional thing. It gives people certainty. When you've then got things like control and self-service, you know, you mentioned the purple bricks of this world beforehand. You know, again, I'm not going to stand here and defend those business models, so I'm not sure I agree with them necessarily myself in certain geographies. But you know, certain online estate agent brokers with a fixed fee model, there's an element there of certainty because the buyer knows how much it's going to cost them. But on the other side of it, there's this onus of responsibility not being on the broker to do everything. It actually sits with the seller, which is, I want to sell my property and I need to pick the best photos. I'm in charge of doing the description. I'm in charge of putting the details in. You know, the onus of responsibility then sits with the vendor, not with the broker. Really clever, but it gives that sort of perspective of control at the vendor's door. So they're more comfortable with it. So yeah, going back in terms of where do I see the future of this lying? I see the future around venture is still going to be around infrastructure works. And I think the future around the industry side, and I'm talking very much about residential here, is around those terms like certainty, transparency, affordability. By the way, that's a little bit when I said about the Argentinian bank that we were working for. It was all about how do we get renters to become buyers? How do we make it more affordable for them to do it? How do we make it easier for them to become homeowners and not just a transient load of people? Affordability is going to be right up there.
Amazing, genuinely amazing. Last interview question. What do you think the real estate industry will look like in the next 20 to 30 years?
What do I think it will look like? I just think there'll be a lot less people.
Right, just a lot less people involved in the real estate industry?
Well, okay. Yeah, it depends on what side. From the actual industry running it, I think there will be a lot less people. I think there'll be a lot less point of sale and point of rent brokers. I think, I think that's what it will. I think there'll be a lot more seamless transactions taking place. If we can sort out all those problems that we've aforementioned, it will be a lot more. All of the deals will take place a lot quicker, with a lot less people involved. Now, the interesting thing, and I wrestle with this a lot, is this going to mean that we become a more transient population? Will we move more because it's easier and cheaper to move? That's what I wrestle with over 20 or 30 years, because whatever we say about affordability, my generation, I'm 42 in January, I'm probably the last of the generation that was able to get onto the property ladder without sort of, you know, the piggy bank of mum and dad to help me out. And the generations after me are always going to be, you know, they've called them generation rent. And people are becoming much more comfortable with renting, despite our push to try and get them to own homes. But I even think with this home ownership angle as well, if we're making it much easier for people to move, it does beg the question of whether or not will people move more? If we make it easier for them and the transactions are quicker and easier and less stressful, would people move more? You think about the recent situation that we found ourselves with COVID, right? There's been this massive upheaval in cities and this massive transient move out to the suburbs or beyond because you can get more for your money. I don't know how long that's going to last. And one thing is certain is that we will have a much more flexible work-life balance where we might go into the office sometimes, we might work from home sometimes. My question is whether or not that will extend to the way that we use a building.
Right. Okay.
You know, why don't we have smaller but more homes which we can become interchangeable with? You've already started to see some sort of ownership clubs, like an ownership of a really fancy car, where you don't, it's like a fractional ownership model as well, where you spend some of your time in here, but then you move over there. And then why couldn't that extend to, well, actually, I'm going to buy this place for 6 months. I might, work on the equity of it. And then I'm going to go and buy over here and I'm going to move. And I think it's a really interesting philosophical point at the moment, which is if we're being more flexible in our work-life balances, I don't see any reason why over the next 20 to 30 years, we wouldn't be more flexible in the way that we utilize the actual buildings that we're in and own.
Right. I mean, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, as things go on in the future and as people get more and more, I don't know, connected with technology, everything becomes a smoother transition.
Mm-hmm.
So it just becomes easier. We have a couple of audience questions now.
Cool.
Don't mind me going through them. First one being, why should I sign up to Unisu?
Why? If you want, I don't mind. I don't mind if you do. But no, I think I just, if you really want to understand all of the different sorts of technologies and really improve your understanding of the changes, then it's probably the foundation stone of your learnings. As I said, the mission is to connect and educate. So if you want to come and learn, and if you also then want to speak to other people that want to learn and develop the future of the built environment, then it's the place to be.
Amazing. Do you think Proptech is essential for any realtor?
Oh, is it essential? No.
No, not essential.
No.
Okay. That's interesting coming from you.
I don't think it's essential because the broker, it's the relationship.
Right. Okay.
The broker has the emotional, or should have the emotional intelligence to work with the buyers.
Right.
I would say what is essential is for the company to have the technology that facilitates what the broker's good at.
Okay. So it's more an investment for the firm rather than the individual.
Yeah, totally. At the end of the day, technology is not going to be the differentiator on whether the house sells or not. That comes down to the broker and them actually caring about the other person that they're selling for. Because if the broker doesn't really, if the broker doesn't like the tech, the person won't sell the house. If the broker really likes, working with people, they'll sell the house anyway. So I just think it's the essential element is the company or the organization or the broker house, whoever it is, that they understand that technology is absolutely foundational.
Right. Okay. What are the low budget Proptech options?
Oh Christ, there's 8,534.
Okay, just top 5 if you have them.
No idea.
No.
Because it does depend again on geographic. But what I would say is that most of them, they operate on freemium models anyway. So, look for those that give you a taster. And what I would say is, you should just try. You should try them. Work out if they're a good fit. And even if they don't, even if they're not a good fit, at the very least, you will have learned something from it. And this is part of the problem with the real estate market is they never take a chance. They want that to be a perfect scenario. They want to work with iSpy 360 because it's perfect. The fact is it's not going to be perfect for everybody. But even if they've tried you guys in this case, they would have learned how you work. They would have learned what they should do better next time. So, Scout, I think we've got, well, as I said, there's 8,000 or so businesses out there. Many of them will offer the freemium options if they're on a SaaS model. And just experience them.
Okay, great advice. What can we as realtors do to stay ahead of the game?
Learn. learn, listen to these sorts of things. And again, going back to that last question, is just speak to technology providers.
Right.
They're not all going to be right, but no conversation will be wasted if you speak to these people, because the technology suppliers are not all brokers either. You know, a lot of them won't have experience. And so it's going to be a quid pro quo in terms of, you know, you're going to help me learn about tech and I'm going to help you learn about property. And it won't be right first time, but there's no reason that if they learn more about you and your challenges, why that product won't be right for you in 6 months' time or a month's time or a week's time, because you're helping each other out.
Okay. Is there a drawback to trying to go completely virtual? Is that even possible?
Wow. Who was I speaking to? I was speaking to a sort of a technology provider that sits on the bridge of fintech and proptech the other day, and he also owns a brokerage, and he said that he runs it more from the letting side. And he's made more money this year from doing everything virtually. He's never going to go back.
Really? So he's actually done that complete.
He's done exactly what you've just said. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure it's right for everybody. I think you've got to be a certain type, but you know, he's brought on properties that he's never ever visited, or his team have never visited. He's worked with the landlords to do the sort of the appraisals, and then they sold everything virtually through virtual tours and then virtual signatory and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it can be done.
A complete online process. That's incredible.
It's cool. It's cool.
Where did the idea come from to start Unisu?
Because we were always getting asked for solutions, and there was just a massive hole in the global market. No one knew. Venture capitalists, academic institutions, the property industry themselves, no one had a clue about the global property market and how big it really was. And it was all at the time being led by the VCs saying X amount of money has been invested in Proptech. They had no frickin' idea what Proptech meant. So somebody from the property industry had to invent something, and that's why we did it. And it's just evolved ever since from there.
Incredible. What advice would you give to someone starting in real estate?
I would ask them at interview, what's their policy on digital transformation?
Right.
And if they had no idea what you were talking about, I wouldn't work for them.
Okay. I mean, this is more advice for them on how to start in real estate.
Yeah. Oh. I don't know what I would advise them.
Right. Okay.
No, I'd say, no, do you know what I probably would? I would say to them, you know, I've seen some people who start, they work their whole lives and they get their university degrees in real estate. And after 2 years, they then think that the technology market is more sexy and they jump.
Right, fair enough.
So I think I would probably say to them, you know, I'd encourage them to say, look, you know, do that, understand the property market, then go across to the technology supplier side and then go back again into the property market so that you can see both an established business and then a growth stage agile business. And you'll be incredibly valuable to the property market.
Definitely. Is there any piece of tech from another industry that you would want to see integrated into the real estate industry?
Not I can think of on the top of my head. And that is purely the limitations of it being a Friday. And I'm desperately looking for a beer. So I think I don't know if I could answer that at the moment.
That's fine. I mean, the thing that came to
mind. Hard one, that.
Go on.
It's a hard one.
I mean, the thing that came to my mind immediately was the CGI in the film industry, then moving into the real estate industry with like.
We're already seeing that. I mean, it's already there. I mean, one of the key sponsors of RE Connect in January is Epic Games.
Oh, amazing! Very cool.
You know, they're sponsoring the whole thing because they're using their CGI for the construction sector. So the Unreal Engine, which fuels games like Fortnite,
Yeah.
is now fueling a lot of the work that they do, because it's all about the CGI work that goes into it. So, you know, even stuff like that, you think, God, it's already there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it is constantly.
But yeah, I see what you mean. It's good.
If you could go back in time to the beginning when prop tech was just emerging, what would you invest in and why?
Christ. I would invest in, well, with the benefit of hindsight, not because I believe in their business models, but I would have invested in some of the sort of the online brokerages and online agents and the portals, you know, because they've just made such ridiculous returns. So I'm looking at it purely from a selfish monetary perspective. If it had come from a, you know, that's from a profiteering perspective. If it comes from a mentality perspective, then I've always liked the property management field and the ability to bring in automation into that, to bring in artificial intelligence into that, to bring in data into that for predictive maintenance. Yeah, definitely any firms which have done well, and some of them, you know, and I could name them because I would have invested in them, but now subsequently I wouldn't invest in them because I don't think they've been ambitious enough globally. But so I'll just say the property management space has got so much going for it.
Right.
I would have stuck some money in there and try to do something good about it.
And I think on that note, that is a very good place to end it. Thank you so much, James, for joining us today.
Thanks, Ishan.
I really, really enjoyed it, and I feel like I've learned quite a bit. Please join us next week for our Tips Tuesday, and I hope everyone has a very wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Cheers, Ish. Thanks, Tim.
Bye.